Welcome to Mighty Banyans on the Bay, the faculty podcast of New College of Florida. My name is Douglas Estes, and I'm an associate professor of religion here at New College.
And my name is Alicia Mercado-Harvey. I'm professor of Spanish, Portuguese, and History at New College, and I'm assistant professor here. So we have today a new guest to kick off our season, right? This is our first podcast of the season, and here to introduce herself.
Yes, hi, my name is Cory Clark, and I am a new associate professor here in social psychology, most recently from University of Pennsylvania, and I'm very excited to be here.
Good. Tell us a little bit about your field. What is social psychology and why is it important?
That's a good question. I think people would probably sort of disagree about what social psychology is, but it's really kind of all of human social behavior. So it's everything we think and do, what we remember, what kinds of information we pursue, how we evaluate information, anything that has to do with our social worlds, which is pretty much everything. So it's sort of like human psychology in all conceivable ways, and it overlaps with all other areas of psychology. But a lot of it is how like environmental features, little social situations can influence our behavior and change what we would do under other contexts, like if we were completely alone.
Right. Psychology has always been a very, very popular major, AOC at New College. So how do you feel about coming to a college where, psychology is one of the stars?
It's actually been great. I like that I have a lot of students in my class. My social psychology class, I think we have about 36 students, and it's very rambunctious and very fun. The nice thing about social psychology, it's actually one of the most popular disciplines on Reddit, apparently. Social psychology papers get upvoted the most of any discipline, or at least this used to be true. And I think it's just because the concepts are so intuitive to people and anyone can understand it. Anyone can understand conformity, pressure to go along with the group, fear of ostracism. Anyone can understand the concepts of like political bias, for example. And so the fact that these are concerns that everyone has in their everyday lives makes it very popular.
Yeah, good. You recently published an article on cognitive chicanery, which I read half of it, and it was awesome. I mean, it's very, and you were right, because it was like, it spoke to me almost in the world that we live in, because it's so social. So tell us a little bit about the paper, some of your arguments, why it's so meaningful.
Yeah, so one of my primary interests is the human pursuit of truth and all the ways our social motivations interfere with that process of really objectively evaluating information and forming an empirically accurate understanding of the world. In that paper, which I think is called Morally Offensive Scientific Findings Activate Cognitive Chicanery, we look at a variety of ways in which people are able to disengage with scientific findings they don't like. So one of our key manipulations, you can always get people with politics. One of our key manipulations is people either read a scientific study showing that liberals are more tolerant than than conservatives, or vice versa. Conservatives are more tolerant than liberals. And then we ask them a variety of questions about these findings. So the findings are identical. The studies are identical. They use the exact same methods. It's just one study finds that liberals are better and one that conservatives are better. And when people are reading that their out group is better than their in group, they get morally offended by these findings. And then they do all kinds of crazy things. Like they're more likely to say that the writing is incomprehensible. They can't even understand what it's saying, even though the writing is the same. They're more likely to say, this isn't even an empirical question to begin with. We can't even answer this question by collecting data. But again, the question is identical in both scenarios. And then we have fun ones at the end where we get people to endorse contradictory claims. So for example, they'll say that the sample size is too small. We need more people. We need more data to answer this question. And then they'll also say data is useless. We should, collect anecdotes and just talk to people, which is, of course, a smaller sample size. So people engage in all of these kinds of all this kind of mental trickery so that they can disregard these findings and not have to assimilate them into their beliefs.
Right. And this occurs, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but in peer review process also for scholars.
Yeah.
Yes? No? Maybe?
Yeah, that's a big question that a lot of scholars have tried to look at. It seems, scholars are human, so they have the same kinds of cognitive tendencies of other people. When they read a scientific finding they don't like, their heart beats a little faster and they might work a little harder to find all the flaws with those findings. But it is a notoriously difficult issue to study because the peer review process takes like 4 hours or so of a person's time. And so you can't really sneakily randomly assign scholars to read different papers because you would be wasting a lot of people's time. But I would love to do that if I could.
Right.
And we've seen this kind of stuff in medical science. That's what I found fascinating, right? Because, I mean, you have the placebo and you have the actual medication, and they've seen that there are some issues with that. You know, people reporting, oh, I feel so much better with this, and it's a placebo. You know, so I wonder how much the mind is tricking us, you know, with this kind of things.
Right. It doesn't necessarily have to. In fact, it's often not conscious. Like our brain does this for us. We don't have to worry about, like, am I processing this information fairly or not? Like, we are predisposed to evaluating information. In the placebo, you're essentially being lied to a degree, and that can create some kind of like psychological hope and make people feel like the placebo is working. Yeah.
Right. I also found your terminology fascinating. I have to say, I don't think I've ever laughed, you know, at reading a colleague's paper. Well, in particular, why this made me laugh is because, you know, what I do, which is memory studies, really comes from postmodernism. So I just found hilarious that you used the term postmodernism. So how did that come about? I'm curious.
I think a lot of it was sort of fun conversations I had with my colleagues about what people do to be able to disregard certain empirical claims. And one we do see is people are just like, too complicated to be answered with data. We can't even do this. We shouldn't even pursue it. Like, scholars shouldn't study this topic. And it's a way of being like, let's not go there, because heaven forbid what we might find. So the motivated postmodernism, I think, was just through conversations and talking about the things we observe our other colleagues do. And there's the same thing. We had one that was, is this preposterous and is it old news? And that one was purely, we've seen people be like, disregard this, it's old news, nobody cares. But then you also have people say, this could never be true. And we see people do both to the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's say a student was interested in coming to New College and studying with you. And I know you teach a whole class on this, but like, what is one thing that a student could do to inoculate themselves from walking down this road where they disregard things that they don't agree with?
Nothing.
Okay.
Nothing. Yeah, no, I think this is like one of the fundamental features of human cognition, and literally nobody is immune to it, myself included. And there are actually studies on biases. There's something called the bias blind spot effect in social psychology. And it's where they present, there's a bias called better than average, where everyone thinks they're better than average on everything good and below average on everything bad. You have people participate in this. You show that they're demonstrating that. Everyone thinks they're better than average. Not possible. And then they ask people, well, now that you know about this bias, this better than average effect, is it possible that you might have inflated your estimates a little bit? And like 80% of people say, nope, I was perfectly accurate.
Right.
So yeah, like showing people that people are biased, even showing them that there's a good chance that they might be biased, doesn't seem to get rid of biases. I think from my end, I try to be aware of the signs. Like if I'm reading something and my heart starts beating faster, or I get a little warm, I'm like, okay, I can tell I don't like this. But does that make me more receptive to the information? Maybe not.
Right.
Interesting. I think the idea that majority of people think they're above average. Even I use that in my class. I mean, that's social psychology at work right there, and in a very demonstrable way. Good. What's your favorite class to teach here? Do you have a favorite class? Some faculty are like, I don't want to say I have a favorite. Others are like, oh yeah, I do have a favorite.
Well, I'm only teaching 2 here right now.
Okay.
And one is social psychology, and the other is intro to experimental psychology, where I'm doing bias as my subtopic.
Okay.
So both are pretty fun. Social psychology is fun because students are so aware of the dynamics in their social worlds, but don't have the right language or the right framework to like understand and talk about it. And then bias is fun just because that's like my favorite topic.
Okay.
And people get a kick out of it. So my least favorite class will be whatever I teach next. That's not one of those 2.
Right. So you're currently teaching your 2 favorite classes.
Possibly, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So what do you think about our system since you're new? You know, it's always good to ask new faculty, no grades, tutorials, ISPs. What do you think of all that?
So since I'm so new, I haven't experienced all of it yet. The narrative evaluations will be an experience. But I'm like mentally preparing myself. So because we have narrative evaluations coming up, I'm trying to like pay attention to how my students are doing every day in a way that I never would have before. In fact, you don't even really think about it because you give them a multiple choice exam, run it through the Scantron, you get the grade. I don't even know which student is getting the grade. Whereas now you want to like pay attention. Who's participating, who's understanding, and making sure you're getting an impression of students while you teach, which is a new experience for me. But it's pretty cool because then you're kind of focusing on who's getting it, who's not, what can I do differently to bring more people on the same page, and what can I do to like stay intellectually stimulating to the people who are getting it. So yeah, so far it's going well. We'll see when I do.
You're confirming my bias. Speaking
Oh,
of
yeah.
bias, right? That I think that a narrative evaluation system really focuses on the process,
Yeah.
in the learning process, and I really love that. So that's my
Yeah.
bias.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Not
So-
just the memorization and the multiple choice. Yeah.
Right.
So it seems like what you do, your primary area of bias and cognitive dissonance, is so important today. You already mentioned that. We can't reiterate that enough. Are you unique in your field in focusing on this, or is like a lot of people focusing on this because of the last 5 years, especially?
So a lot of people study biases because they manifest in tons and tons and tons of different ways. Like
Okay.
there's actually some kind of infographic of biases, and it's like this huge circle, and you can't even read the font because there's so many, and it's such a big area of study. I am slightly more unique in my focus on science itself. I'm particularly interested in biases and how people interpret science, and also biases among scientists. So I recently published a paper looking at what is essentially like fear of ostracism among psychology professors. So I asked professors what they believed about 10 controversial conclusions in psychology, like empirical claims. And then I asked them like how reluctant they were to say what they believe in professional settings, so like at a conference or in a faculty meeting. And we see that professors who believe these controversial empirical claims are true are more likely to self-censor their beliefs. And it's largely because they're afraid of like the judgment of their peers. So like psychology professors don't want to say what they think is true about psychology because just like everyone else, they have these social concerns and they're afraid that people won't like them and people won't invite them to the party anymore. They won't be popular and they won't win the award. And so that's a relatively unique focus because scientists are like very hard to study. They're hard to access. They're expensive. But I think they're one of the most interesting groups because they're the ones that are sharing information with people, evaluating information, and determining what's high quality and what's not, what deserves to be published and what's not. So
Yeah.
I hope to dive deeper in
Yeah.
that in the future.
Yeah. One thing that struck me about what you wrote is also an argument I've made, other people I think have made, but scientists occupy sort of a quasi-religious role in our society today, where they kind of speak ex cathedra, and you're supposed to do what they say. But I mean, ultimately, they're fallible folks who, many of whom are trying to do the best they can, but bias creeps in and creates problems in our society.
Well, and the concept of expertise, I want to build into this too, because I mean, we study something very intensely, you know, so we're experts on this tiny little thing, but this idea that professors like are authority of anything knowledge,
Politics.
is just, anything is just absurd, you know. I mean, unless you're a political scientist, maybe you have a little bit more knowledge than your average professor, but other than that, you don't have any particular expertise on that.
Right. You have the expertise in your one narrow area, but when it comes to policy decisions, there are like 80 relevant areas. So they'll ask scientists like, what do you think about this policy? And maybe they know the economic implications, but they don't know the public health implications. And so sure, they care about that thing because that's what they know, but they don't care about the other 79 relevant issues. So it is a weird place. And of course, scientists want to be the authorities because that feels great. Like, I'm the expert, I know. But we only know so much, and we're all flawed. And that's something I try to teach my students is like, you can learn a lot in science, but like, some of it's true, some of it's not true. And you have to remain like critical and skeptical and like think through what's plausible and what's not.
Right. But even in saying that, I feel like that there are segments of our society that will recoil at what you said, regardless of, you know, without even knowing your underlying arguments in various areas.
They'll recoil at the idea that we should be skeptical of scientists.
Yeah, or just, or that not everybody who's an expert of certain things is therefore not an expert of other things.
Yeah. Yeah, and I get that. There is like a concern that scientists need to be sharing these sort of simple, like confident narratives with the public in order to like facilitate cooperation. I actually have a paper under review now that looks at this, and we actually find that scholars who forward sort of like trust the science narrative and are like very authoritative and like this is what we know is true and this is what you should be doing, those people are actually trusted less, and people are less willing to listen to them than scholars who are like, this is a moving target, we're still learning, we've made mistakes, we're sorry about those mistakes, we're engaging with these dissenting views, not accusing people of being science skeptics. Those actually get more respect. So I think we're in a period where we need to reflect on like how we're messaging science to the public and expertise. And maybe people can handle a little more nuance and a little more uncertainty and a little more, like we should all be thinking for ourselves while also attending to the quality of information that scientists put out in the world, which they do a lot of great work, but some of the work's not so great.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the most controversial part of this, because I mean, science in general, they don't necessarily have all that much impact, but we're talking about medical science and things that dictate public policy. That's where things get really tricky.
Yeah, that's where psychology is a nice place to be, because what we do is relatively inconsequential.
So, and I think even in saying that, we can let's just lay aside COVID, because that's, of course, the Hitler in every example, right? Okay, and you maybe help me with this example, but my understanding is that one of the foremost scientists of Alzheimer's disease fabricated much of his material over the course of, is that true? Did I have the right disease?
I think it was autism. This one I know for sure.
Wakefield.
It was Andrew Wakefield. It was
So,
the whole thing about the MMR being causing autism. That's completely debunked, and he made up a lot of data.
Okay. So when this happens, it of course degrades public trust in science. It's and my question is that what can we do? Like students who come in and they're going to be the future leaders, is there anything that they can do?
What I think we should be doing as educators is teaching them how to evaluate the quality of information and to be aware of the psychological motivations of scholars. Scholars want to publish papers. They want to publish papers that get a lot of attention, that covered by the New York Times, that get them a book deal, that get them a best viewed TED Talk. Scientists are pursuing status themselves. And so knowing that, we need to know all scientists have some kind of motivation. And then, when we evaluate information, don't just take it on its face, but look at what they do, what was their sample, what were their methods, is this high quality or not? Can I trust this or not? Does this person have a reputation for publishing really flashy but unbelievable things? Or are their conclusions often like nuanced and, sometimes contradicting their own? If a scholar's publishing work contradicting their previous theory, well, that's a sign that they're open to revising their views and being wrong, and not all scholars are. So I think, teaching students what to look for in terms of evaluating the quality of information and evaluating which sources are trustworthy is really important, and something I'm working on.
Good.
That sounds fascinating. So this has been a great conversation. We really want to thank you for being the first coming, and we're really excited to have you at New College. And thank you everybody for watching, and don't forget to send us questions, comments, anything that comes to mind. If you're watching this podcast, let us know, and we'll be ready to answer and happy to answer your questions.
Thank you both.